Hey guys, this is Pastor Terry coming to you from the Great Stages of Fact campus. Nobody here but us. But hey, I just wanted to take a few minutes just to shout out to you and maybe give you some encouragement. Brandon and I are going to be doing these messages for you 3 times a week, 4 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So check these things out. We'll also be adding some notes and some things that are from the talks that you can maybe go and look up scriptures, things like that. But I wanted to start today about this whole quarantine thing. You guys are probably loving it. You guys got time off school. Maybe some of you aren't, but hey, a 3-week or 4-week or however long many weeks vacation. Man, I would have killed for that when I was in high school. But there's also a lot of things going on. A lot of things that might be a little scary. A lot of things that could be challenging for you and your family. So I want to give you some encouragement, and I want to start with maybe an unlikely source, and that's a guy by the name of Gideon. And then we find his story in Judges chapter 6. And in Judges chapter 6, we see that Gideon and a lot of his people were actually being forced to social distance themselves only because they were being invaded. They were living in the hills, they were living in caves, they were living up in the mountains, and afraid. They were scared because the Midianites and several other tribes had come in and were basically ransacking their country, and things weren't great. They were a struggle. Things were changing daily for Gideon, and it was hard. And so when we see in Judges chapter 6, verse 6, it says that they called out to God. And when God showed up, Gideon was hiding. He was hiding in a wine press and wasn't making wine. He was threshing wheat because he didn't want his crop to be stolen. But through this story, I want to give you a couple things that came out of that simple call to God. And that's what I want to encourage you with today is that in the midst of this, no matter what's going on, no matter where you find yourself, whether, man, you're just enjoying life and this break is awesome, or maybe your job shut down and you can't go to work and you have to stay home and, man, you're getting bored out of your skull. I want to encourage you, just like Gideon and the Israelites did, to call out to God. And we see that in Judges chapter 6, verses 7 through 10. Read the background before because it really sets us up, because they hadn't been doing what God had told them to do. And so God allowed these things to befall them. And but they did call out to God, and God did answer. So if you find yourself and you're anxious, or you're just having a great time, I encourage you, call out to God and see how He'll answer you during this time. And you do that in 2 ways. We see that in verses 7 through 9. It says they called out to God, and I want to just read this to you. It says, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, those are the people that were oppressing them, He sent them a prophet that said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and delivered you from the hand of the oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land." You see, Gideon had grown up hearing the story of the Exodus. He had grown up hearing great stories of faith. Much like many of you here at Fact, you've grown up hearing these awesome, tremendous stories of God's hand of providence and God's hand of deliverance. It's the same God now as it was back then. But because they didn't heed the warnings that God had told them in Deuteronomy, because they didn't listen, they didn't remember. And so this morning I want to encourage you 2 ways. One is, when you call on God, remember what He's done for you. What has He done for you in the past? What has He done for your family? What are the stories, not of someone else's life, but of your life? I can share a lot of stories of the way God has provided and God has given miraculously in my family. Even as I was growing up as a teenager. Do we remember what God has done, or are we just so caught up in our culture and in our phones and in our Facebook pages and Instagram accounts and Twitter accounts that it only matters what the last 160 characters were? It only matters what the last post was, not all the accumulation of all of that. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so I want to challenge you. Remember what God has done. Remember the stories. Maybe sit down with your parents and ask them, what are the stories of God that you have in your family? Your grandparents, your parents, your friends. What a great conversation starter. For Gideon, it was they needed to remember. Let me read that to you. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened. They called out to God, but they didn't remember all the things that God had told them to do, all the things that God had told them and what he had done in their lives up until this point. The second thing I want you to think about as you learn to live this, to be a disciple in this new culture of social distancing and all the other things that are going on, is not just remember what God's done, because he'll do those things again. He'll miraculously deliver people. He'll do miraculous things if we call on him. But the second thing is remember what he said. The Bible is full of things that God has said. The Bible is, from start to finish, God's words. Think about this. The Bible was written by 40 different authors over the span of 1,500 years on 7 different continents in 3 different languages. And not once does it contradict itself or give a message that contradicts the other messages. Even Paul, throughout Corinthians and Romans, over and over again says, as the scriptures say. Don't you know what the scriptures say? And my question to you is, do you know what they say? Do you know what God says about who he is? And about who you are? And about what he wants to do in you and through you? So my challenge over the next week, over the next few days, is to simply read it. Read the stories. Read the story of Gideon in Judges chapter 6. We're going to be talking more about him this week. Ask questions. What's going on? What did Jesus actually say? So that's my challenge to you guys. Have conversation. Talk about it. But don't just talk about it. Get in it and see what it actually says. Hey, this is Pastor Terry, and we will see you on Friday.